Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, sir. I very much want to present my party's views on the supplementary demands for grants 2021-22 presented before this House by the Honourable Finance Minister, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman. Now, we're all gathered here, sir, at a time when our nation's economy continues to battle the significant forces of disruption that have been set in motion by the COVID-19 pandemic and which can trace their way back in our country to the disaster of demonetisation 3 years earlier. While we all applaud the heroic efforts of our nation's healthcare workers, our nurses, doctors and other members of the medical fraternity, the truth is, sir, the virus combined with the short-sighted policy decisions of this government has ushered in a period of uncertainty for the economic revival of the country. And I have to say, sir, that we have been seeing crises everywhere we look. The foundations of the economy have been laid low ever since demonetisation. And let's face it, the star performers that have been affected by the pandemic include the tourism and service industries, which are devastated, the backbone of the economy, agriculture, MSMEs, both in crisis. And as I pointed out during the budget debate in February, the government has given us then, I'm afraid, and continued to, the usual combination of high rhetoric, grand ambition, exaggerated numbers and unrealistic targets, all diluted with underwhelming allocations to crucial sectors. The very fact that the Finance Minister has come back to us with such a large supplementary demand for grants testifies to this. The government had budgeted a total expenditure of 34.83 lakh crores in fiscal year 22. But spending has defeated the estimates and excess expenditure has brought the Finance Minister back to the House with this new request. The gross additional expenditure she seeks is over 1.87 lakh crores, of which 23,675 crores will be the actual cash outgo. Of this, sir, more than 80% of the extra net cash outgo has been directed to 5 specific items, the largest of these being the equity infusion into Air India Assets Holding, over 62,000 crores, followed by substantive additional subsidy for fertilizer, 58,000 crores, and food, almost 50,000 crores, followed by a large allocation for the clearance of past dues owed to exporters, and finally a modest boost to the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Now, let me share with the Honourable Minister that we in the opposition can understand the need for critical government spending as a result of the pandemic. But as we have repeatedly pointed out, sir, including during the last budget debate, the government must stop presenting unrealistic targets to this House and offer much more transparent numbers to the country. I have had the privilege of pointing out here that the macroeconomic figures presented by the Honourable Minister in February had to be greeted with healthy scepticism, and I'm afraid her supplementary demand for grants merely confirms the suspicions and apprehensions I voiced 10 months ago. Now, the supplementary demands for grants clearly indicates a gross miscalculation on the part of the government on expected expenditure, and in so doing, it essentially insults Parliament. It undermines the control of Parliament over the budget by going over and above beyond what had been sanctioned at the government's own request and which we have told the government at the time was not realistic. Now, the additional demands confirm that it is unlikely that the government will be able to stick to its claim of a 9.5% fiscal budget deficit, which itself, of course, was an increase from 6% last year. The current cash outgo clearly shows that the government will be unable to stick to its own claimed target of capping the fiscal deficit at 6.5% of GDP, 6.8% they revised it to. They're not going to meet that, so they're going to exceed that. The government's confidence in meeting this was already, I think, really fading last month when the Finance Secretary made a comment about it being unlikely to be achieved. But we know about COVID. We knew about COVID, so blaming COVID is not good enough, sir. Unrealistic estimates were announced in February. We knew about COVID at that time. But what does it say about the government that data today shows that the total government debt as a percentage of GDP for both centre and states has risen from 70% in March 2019, which was bad enough, to 90% by March 2021, sir, which is much higher than the 60% recommended target that has been recommended by the FRBM Review Committee back in 2017. Now, the gap between expected revenue and expenditure is likely to widen further. Why? Because disinvestment has not made the progress the government rationally predicted for it. In fact, if you look at the disinvestment target of 1.7 lakh crores, it's going to be missed by a large margin, a very large margin. The privatization of BPCL is not expected to be completed till fiscal year 23, and all of this, of course, doesn't even take into account the estimated 65,000 crores in the potential revenue foregone from their calculations because of their recent cuts in fuel taxes. Now, this is not altogether new from this government, sir. They've repeatedly failed to meet their disinvestment targets in 4 of the 6 years since 2014. And the 2 years where they did meet it was through the slightly comical arrangement of getting one PSU to buy shares from another PSU. That track record, sir, extends this year as well. At the end of October, according to the Controller General of Accounts, the government has only managed to raise 9,333 crores, and while a lot was said about the sale of the aircraft carrier, of the national airline, Air India, to the Tata Group, a significant component of those demands for grants, the ones that before us today, sir, reflect 62,057 crores for Air India Asset Holding Company Limited, which carries the burden of the majority of the debt the carrier was under. In other words, sir, if people think that by privatizing Air India, the burden of a loss-making airline is off the hands of the taxpayers, they better think again, because we are going to be carrying that burden, sir, for a long time to come. The government remains liable for nearly 46,000 crores of accumulated debt, and that debt has therefore been passed to the taxpayer. So, Achedin is going to be a while coming, sir, no question about it. If it comes at all. Perhaps with a change of government we might see it. Now, the economic distress, sir, that we've been seeing because of the pandemic has also disproportionately affected rural India. And again, we had pointed out, sir, I'm proud to say in my budget speech I'd made a big issue of this, the lack of allocations and the cuts that were imposed on Manrega, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, sir. Today, some money has been requested. I'm sure this House will gladly grant it. But is it enough, or is it too little, too late? At a time of record levels of demands for work, let's not forget, sir, unemployment today is at the worst levels ever recorded since they began recording unemployment figures. So, at that time, a lot of people have come under the Manrega scheme saying, please give us work. And the government, in its wisdom, actually slashed allocations for the scheme by a shocking 35% in the budget that we approved last year, earlier this year. In fact, in August last year, over 24.2 million households requested work under Manrega, a 66% hike from the same period in 2019. But with the government slashing allocations, sir, we have seen a real problem. And I'm sorry to say that with 4 months still remaining in the current financial year, the government's own financial statements show a negative net balance of 10,244 crores in Manrega, including payments due. Sorry to say, this is a government-made disaster, Mr. Chairman. And so the fact is that the current proposed supplementary allocation of rupees 22,039 crores reveals how the government continues to grossly underestimate the importance of Manrega as a lifeline, sir, a lifeline to rural India. And it remains 50% short of expert estimates that have been saying for a whole year now that we need at least 50,000 crore rupees to meet the current levels of demand for Manrega due to continued rural distress in our country. Merely allocating funds is also not enough, because there's no clarity from the union government on when the funds will be released so that the states can actually process payments to those who have done the work. Even with this new infusion of 22,039 crore, the new total expenditure under Manrega would increase to only 95,000 crore, which is 14% below the revised estimates of 1,11,500 crores for fiscal year 2021. So how can we applaud the government, sir, for giving 14% less than was revised estimates of last fiscal year at a time when the need and the demand is actually much greater than it's ever been? I think the government has once again undershot its target. In fact, it's estimated that out of 6.77 crore people who demanded work under Manrega this year, 5.87 crores only got employment. So there's an unmet demand of almost 1 crore people, 13.25%, who haven't got work. The ones who've got work haven't been paid on time. But the ones who haven't got work, what do we do about them, sir? The government has failed to provide employment to those in need. It's failed to give them unemployment allowance as mandated by the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act of 2005. Okay, so we'll turn again then away from agriculture, where the government has again let us down in this way, turn to the railways, because railways, as you know, is already featuring in the current supplementary demands for grants. The fact is that the government's repeated attempts to hide behind rhetoric in matters of serious policy making and governance really has again been apparent when it comes to the railway budget. They've asked for 20,000 crores more for the railways. But we'll all recall, sir, that in the budget of this year, the Ministry of Railways was allotted a large sum of money, a record sum in the Finance Minister's words. She announced a mega rail plan for the budget speech, released a national rail plan targeting India 2030, broad ambitions and targets that were released, clearly stated by the Finance Minister. But the government appears to have grossly underestimated the funding required to fulfill these targets. Further, sir, the nature of allocations and reappropriations under the second batch of supplementary demands for grants reveals that the priorities of the Railway Ministry has been completely reworked. The whole budget will have to be completely reworked to the tune of 40,000 crores, and we're looking at reappropriating existing grants for 20,000, then 20,000 new today, and at the end of it, what are we looking at, sir? We're looking at a report of the Controller and Auditor General, the CAG, telling the government that there is a need for more realistic estimation of supplementary requirements by the Ministry of the Railways. Apparently, the Ministry of Railways had obtained supplementary grants of 817.5 crore earlier in anticipation of higher expenditure, but the final expenditure was even less than the original provisions. I'm quoting from the CAG report, sir, and they say that they really need to be more realistic in calculating the numbers. This is something we have been saying in this House time and again with the government's budget numbers, sir. Now, despite obtaining these supplementary demands, the final expenditure remained below the original budget estimates for the year, and yet the Railway Ministry also incurred unsanctioned expenditure of over 5,000 crores in 2019 fiscal year, another 500 crores in 2020, which means that the Ministry's finances are, to put it mildly, sir, in a shambles. What are the other misses in this budget? If you look, sir, that I mentioned Unrega when it comes to the agriculture sector, but there's been no provision allotted at all for MSP. The fact is there are two schemes in the government that ensure the implementation of MSP. The Market Intervention and Price Support Scheme, MISPSS, and the Pradhan Mantri Annadata Aay Sanrakshan Yojana, PM Asha. Both of those have witnessed consecutive reductions in the last 2 years, leading to a 20–25% cut in this year's budget. Now, the supplementary demands would have been the perfect place to cover up that hole. They have not done so. Having withdrawn the farm laws, how are they going to be able to promise MSP when they have cut by 25% the money available for MSP, sir? I would love the Finance Minister to explain this magic that is being inflicted upon the nation. Now, sir, there are a number of areas where the budget was itself deficient, and sorry to say, the supplementary demands for grants have not made up for it. One immediate area that we've talked about, of course, is healthcare, for which some additional funds have been provided, but there's still no money for any meaningful fiscal stimulus. All we have continued to see in the government's approach is a focus on liquidity rather than direct fiscal support. But giving cheaper credit to businesses is of no value unless consumption and demand increases. But demand won't increase unless people have money to spend. Where is the money going to come into the pockets of people? Even in Riga, sir, there are going to be a lot of people unemployed, unable to purchase. Tourism and hospitality, where are the supplementary demands for that? A very major industry in our country in severe crisis, and an industry which employs a lot of people, including semi-skilled labour. Who is going to ensure that money is available to boost that sector? Defence. You remember, sir, that I had to say in this House how shocked I was that the Finance Minister did not even mention the word defence in her budget speech. Again, here is a great opportunity to make up for that omission. We have a crisis on our borders, with the Chinese sitting on territory that they never controlled before. Are we giving our military enough resources to protect this nation's security and self-respect? Why has the Finance Minister not asked us for money for the Defence Ministry in the supplementary allocations? We have, sir, a number of serious questions like this to ask. I do want to leave enough time to my colleagues, but I have to say that we had already seen, with the ignoring of agriculture and the ignoring of defence, I was forced to say this is not a Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan era under this government. It's a Na Jawan, Na Kisan budget that we have. And we are seeing the same thing continuing, sir, in the supplementary demands for grants. And I do want to say to you, sir, very frankly, that we are seeing this across the board. Look, for example, at the Women and Child Development Ministry. We have a situation in Women and Child Development where the Parliamentary Standing Committee has been forced to point out the gross underutilisation of funds. Now, the Finance Minister is going to save that money, and I'll take just 1 minute to wrap up, sir. He's going to save that money and say, see, we have tried to meet our targets by saving money, not only by reducing expenditure, not merely by raising revenue. But the truth is that according to the Standing Committee, the important schemes, including Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana, Poshan Abhiyan, etc., have not been able to spend the money allotted to them. They've grossly underused their money, and the result in this process is the government is able to point to savings, but the benefits have not reached the women of our country and the children of our country. It's no longer, sir, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. It is actually Paise Bachao, Beti Dubao. That's what's happening with this government. Thank you, sir. One last point, sir. Yesterday, in her reply on a different bill, the Finance Minister had made a particular claim which I'm afraid I must address. She had specifically said that there was a tender allocated in my constituency to create a port of Virunium. She said in violation of the rules a one-bidder tender. I do want to let her know, sir, there were actually 2 rounds of bidding under a PPP model. After the failure of those rounds, 3 rounds of bidding under the landlord model. And what is more, sir, I have the full details, but I'll be happy to share with her of the saga of those who have bid, why they were disqualified, and why we ended up with only one valid bidder.
Thank you.
Let me conclude, sir, by just saying, ultimately, these supplementary demands for grants are for the economic well-being of our country. We believe the government has not done a terribly good job of looking after our economy, sir. We certainly will not stand in the way of giving some of these resources, but we are constrained to point out that the government should stop miscalculating and making wrong claims when they come with their original proposals, and in their supplementary demands, they must recognise the real problems and ask for enough money to solve them, rather than undershooting as they have again done. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Shri Nishikantji Dubey ji. निशिकांत जी बोलेंगे.
Crores of rupees. So that